Welcome back, folks. My name's Shane. I recently posted my Panasonic LUMIX GH7 video online. If you missed that, I'll link it down in the description box. Since reviewing the GH7, it really got me thinking about my Panasonic G9II and whether or not I would trade it up for a GH7. For those who are serious filmmakers, the GH7 makes the most sense if you don't currently have either of these two cameras. This is definitely the camera to buy. The active cooling and ProRes RAW recording is a no-brainer for serious productions or client work where reliability is first and foremost. For people shooting vlogs, YouTube content, and photography, the G9II might be the best option, and I'll explain why throughout this video. Now that the GH7 is out, the G9II is arguably the most underrated camera from Panasonic currently. It has 95% of what the GH7 has, with all of the benefits of a smaller, lighter, and cheaper camera body. So don't feel too bummed if you have buyer's remorse regarding the G9II. It's a great camera, and it offers, in my experience, some benefits over the GH7, which we'll talk about in this video. Before we get into this video, I just want to say personally, I think it's great to see such positive hype behind Micro Four Thirds again, and I'm really happy that Panasonic have finally sort of come to the table, although some people will say it's probably a year or two late. I totally get that. The GH7's the camera I think a lot of people were waiting for when it came to the GH6, so it's here finally. And if you haven't moved over to full frame like a lot of people, including myself to some extent, then this is a really great choice. It was also great to see some of the other channels who reviewed this be as enamored with it as they were. I thought that was really cool because a lot of them will all only shoot full frame. I think this will appeal to a wider audience now that it has everything. It's pretty cool. From what I've seen in the comment section and talking to a few friends, there's a bit of buyer's remorse when it comes to folks who got the G9II. Honestly, I also felt a little bit of buyer's remorse after I used the GH7 coming from a G9II, but after thinking about this for a little while, you still might want to choose the G9II over the GH7 or vice versa if you don't own either, and I'll give you a few things to think about that will make the difference in your decision. Let's start by talking about why I purchased the Panasonic G9II. At the time, I had no idea the GH7 was coming out, and I wanted a compact Micro Four Thirds camera that had all the video features and autofocus that we were waiting for, and this ticked all of those boxes for me personally. I also wanted an OG style Micro Four Thirds experience, the smaller form factor and design, kind of reminiscent of a GH5, making it a great travel or handheld camera. And that's why I got it. After testing the review model of the G9II, the IBIS was mind-blowingly great. The color science is excellent. The overall image quality is really a step up over the older generation of Micro Four Thirds cameras. Sure, there's no active cooling or ProRes RAW internal recording, but it records Apple ProRes, 5.8K OpenGate, 5.7K up to 60 frames per second, and this is Panasonic's photo hybrid camera. It's insane. As I said in my initial review of the G9II, it felt like the GH6 we were all waiting for, and I still feel like that even today. This was all the stuff we wanted in the GH6. The phase hybrid autofocus was better than the full frame cameras until the recent firmware upgrades. And I've used this G9II in plenty of different projects and shooting scenarios, and I love its small form factor and robust recording modes. This camera is a great choice for Micro Four Thirds shooters. And then in walks the Panasonic GH7, the new flagship video-centric camera for Micro Four Thirds, and arguably the best camera that Panasonic has ever made. But is it for everybody? That's the question. It's also worth noting that the GH7 shares almost everything in common with the G9II, including the same sensor, same color science, same dynamic range and low light performance. It also has the same phase hybrid autofocus as the G9II. The Panasonic GH7 definitely has a few new tracking modes over the G9II, but if I've learned anything from Panasonic over the last few years, it's that I would expect all of those same modes to come to their flagship photo hybrid camera for Micro Four Thirds. So the G9II will hopefully, or at some point, eventually get those same autofocus tracking modes. But the autofocus on this camera is so good. It's just in the way that it tracks certain objects. And again, I think that'll be upgraded in a future firmware update. Just remember, there's a lot more common ground with these two cameras than what makes them different, so keep that in mind if you've already got a G9II. In my experience, there's three main reasons why someone would buy a GH7 over a G9II. The active cooling being the first and foremost. This is a make or break situation for some folks shooting indefinitely or out in the field. The second reason is ProRes RAW recording. This is the next main reason why you would pick the GH7 over the G9II. But that's a feature that I think will be best suited to folks who are already shooting RAW on a different camera system. If you're unfamiliar with shooting RAW, it can chew through a terabyte of data in about 20 minutes, 1 terabyte. So not only do you need to have storage ready to go and external hard drives and so forth, but you need to be able to store those files somewhere else if you plan on backing them up, which means get ready to get the hard drives shaking and rattling, because you're going to go through hard drive space like nothing else. So keep that in mind. But yeah, if you're already set up in that type of workflow, the GH7 is definitely the way to go. Thirdly, there's a paid firmware upgrade for the GH7, which will also be for the GH6 at some point, that gives us the Airy Alexa color science. It's called Airy Log 3, I think is the color profile name. Now, I've just installed that. I haven't tested it yet. I'll be testing it coming up, but this is a really great feature that will no doubt appeal to serious filmmakers. The thing is, the more I think about the reasons to go for the GH7 over the G9 Mark II, I'm starting to realize that I might not actually need it. While it's a monster of a camera, no questions about it, and do I want one? Absolutely. But unless you're having issues with the G9 Mark II overheating, or if you plan on shooting RAW, is it really worth the upgrade here? The video recording modes in MOV and MP4 are exactly the same on both cameras. You get the same image quality, same sensor as I mentioned before, and all the same great modes in Apple ProRes, up to the point where this goes into the RAW options. Color science on both cameras look identical to my eye, and the end result will be exactly the same. Unless you need RAW recording, the image quality on the G9 Mark II will look every bit as good as the GH7. The biggest trade-off with the G9 Mark II is that it's designed as a photo hybrid camera, much like the original. So this is Panasonic's way of saying it doesn't have active cooling. Can I get the G9 Mark II to overheat? Yes, but it takes quite a lot. Now, there's a few scenarios where I could get this to overheat. Shooting 4K at 120 frames per second indefinitely will give you about 20 minutes before you see the heat warning message, and it will eventually overheat. I was also able to get the G9 Mark II to overheat in direct sunlight on a hot day. And this is a black camera body, so it's going to absorb a lot of that heat and just cook. Being that it doesn't have an exhaust fan on here like the GH7, this is definitely one of its limitations, but all electronics will cook, especially black ones in the sun like this. A few people I know on YouTube have also been able to get this to overheat by using the HDMI out into an external monitor while recording internally. Now, if that's a scenario that you shoot in a whole lot, then definitely go for the GH7. This conversation about overheating alone might be enough for people to get the GH7, but I can tell you after 5 months or more with the G9 Mark II, it's not something that I think about unless it's in the middle of summer shooting outside on a hot day. That's when I would take my S5 Mark IIX with the active cooling. I used the G9 not long ago for a guitar shop walkthrough video on my other channel, and I shot with it for hours on a tripod and indoors, shooting clip after clip, and it performed great. I shot all of this footage at 4K 50 frames per second, 422 10-bit, while also using the S&Q mode at 4K 100p for coverage shots, and it had no problems whatsoever with overheating. Alright, let's talk about slow motion. One of the biggest benefits, I think, to the G9 Mark II is its S&Q mode. This can shoot up to 4K to 120 frames per second with phase detection autofocus. If we take a look at the GH7's variable frame rate mode, while this can go up to 4K to 120 frames per second as well, you're back to manual focus and you got to dig through the menus to find it. If you're a new user, the experience win goes to the G9 Mark II, as well as giving us autofocus. So this is a much better camera for shooting slow motion. Now, if we're talking about HD, where you're back to manual focus on both cameras at their highest frame rates, the GH7 looks awesome at 1080p at 300 frames per second, whereas the maximum on the G9 Mark II is 1080p at 240 frames per second. But the image quality at the same rates both look identical, but the win in terms of how fast it can process this footage goes to the GH7. So you can get 300 frames per second on this, and it looks absolutely stunning. Again, if you just plan on shooting at 4K to 120 frames per second, for example, the win goes to the G9 Mark II. The S&Q mode just makes the overall usability of this camera better in my experience. Now, when it comes to size and weight, this is always a consideration for those who like to travel or pack light. Again, this is where the G9 Mark II wins, coming in at 668 grams instead of the 810 grams of the GH7. While this doesn't sound like much on paper, if you've ever traveled interstate on an airlines or overseas, packing as light as you can definitely makes a difference. I can fit more in my camera bag bringing the G9 Mark II than I could potentially with a GH7. When it comes to handheld work, both of these cameras are great ergonomically. The grips are very similar. The GH7 is a little thicker, obviously, thanks to that active cooling, but they both feel great in the hand. But over the course of 1, 2, or 3 hours shooting handheld, I'd much rather be shooting with the G9 Mark II just based on its weight. You will notice a difference, especially if you're adding larger lenses to either of these two cameras. Now let's talk about whether or not I'll be buying a Panasonic GH7 myself, being the camera desperado that I am. So I'll definitely be picking one up at some point. Without question, I love this camera. I'm a big fan of Micro Four Thirds, so I think this will be a great addition to not only my G9 Mark II in an A-B kind of situation for any time I'm doing stuff locally here, but it will also be great for pairing with my GH6 that I'm shooting this video with. The image quality and all that kind of stuff is very similar in comparable modes to the GH6, although the sensor in the new camera is definitely better. So I think this will be great when it comes to running an A10 Mini, for example, or any time where I've got more than one camera hooked up and I need to be shooting Micro Four Thirds. This is a really great camera, as is the GH6, and if you still own a GH6, I'm hoping some of these updates we've seen for the GH7 come to that camera in a future firmware upgrade. Like I mentioned on a couple of videos ago, it felt like the GH6 has kind of been abandoned. Now we kind of know why, but it sucks for GH6 owners. So hopefully we can see some of these upgrades come down to a GH6 that we've seen in both of these two cameras. All right, let's wrap this video up. So I think the message here is that these two cameras are very similar. They're so much closer than I think people realize, as they share essentially the same guts internally. While there's some admissions on the cooling and codecs of the G9 Mark II compared to the GH7, this is still a beast of a hybrid camera. I now see the G9 Mark II as a smaller, more compact GH7 that will get the job done for the majority of vloggers, YouTubers, and travel scenarios. Anyway, let us know what you think. If you've purchased the G9 Mark II, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I have no plans on getting rid of mine, and knowing now what I know about the GH7, I think these two cameras work great together. Thanks for watching.